My daughter is 2 years old. She's about yay high. And she's at that beautiful age. You might know it. Terrible twos. It's not all terrible though, right? She's curious. She's asking lots of questions. She's exploring the world around her. She's learning so much. But she's unaware that she's developing identities. We all hold identities. Take a moment now to think about it. If you think about your own identities, what's the most prominent that comes to mind? Was it a professional role identity? A leader, a teacher, a chef, an accountant? Perhaps a relationship identity? A husband, a wife, mum, dad? Gender identity? Faith-based identity? Or something else? Okay, raise your hand nice and high. I'd like to see your hands up. Raise your hand nice and high if you had learner as your prominent identity. Okay, have a look around. I can only see maybe 2 hands. Imagine you've just discovered a pair of glasses. Actually, I was going to run around before you all arrived today and pop some on your chairs, but I think you may already have these glasses on you. Maybe they're sitting in your pocket, or maybe you're wearing them and you're not even aware of it. If you could get them out, they look like this. Just pop them on. You can imagine they feel really lovely, just tucked neatly behind your ears. You've got no obstruction with your nose. They're flush. They feel natural. These aren't prescription glasses. They're not Ray-Bans. They're not Bailey Nelsons. They're not even like Google tech-enhanced invisible glasses. No, these are a metaphorical pair of glasses. They're a lens in which to view the world, a lens of learning. Suddenly you realize that most things in life can be boiled down to a learning scenario. Going to the gym, an opportunity to learn an exercise technique. Relationships, an opportunity to learn about communication. Cooking dinner, an opportunity to retrieve an old recipe or learn a new recipe. But these glasses are so much more than just a lens on how to look at the world. These glasses are extra special. They seamlessly integrate with all your senses, like your whole body. They change the way you interact with the world, and they fundamentally change your experience of the world. My goal as a dad is to try and foster this learning identity within my daughter, to help her embrace these glasses. But not just any learner, a self-regulated learner, someone who's aware of their learning process, their thinking, their motivations for learning, but also has a set of tools, a suite of tools, strategies, if you will, that they can use to change, control, alter their learning experience. Now, self-regulated learning is a really complex topic. It's an umbrella term for so many different terms. I've already mentioned motivation, cognition, how we think, and metacognition, how we think about that thinking. But to go a step further, it's how we change and control that thinking. The easiest way I can explain it to you here today is for you to imagine that a light has gone on in the living room of your mind. In this living room, there's a TV. And the TV is mostly on. It's your thoughts. It's your thinking. Sometimes you feel so immersed in the television, you are the television. You are your thoughts. Other times you're able to sort of almost sit back on a couch and watch your thoughts, observing your thoughts. You might refer to this as mindfulness. You're noticing your thinking. Imagine you've just found the remote. Maybe it was tucked down the side of the couch. You've just found it. Ooh, you've got control now. You can change the channel. You can alter aspects of the television. You can change your thinking. You might have a group of buttons on that remote for self-questions, the things that you ask yourself when you're engaged in learning. What's the most essential thing for me to learn here? What would a learner do? What can I learn from this? You might have a group of buttons for self-instructions, things you tell yourself during a learning process. Okay, I'm not doing so well here. but failure is a normal part, a common part of a learning process. You might have other groups of buttons there for different motivations, self-planning, self-monitoring, self-evaluating, self-reinforcement, and the list goes on. You can start to get a sense for how complex this beast is. Each time you engage with those buttons, there's a process. You have to know what the buttons are, and you need to know how they function. You need to know when and why to use each button. But every time you engage in that process of self-regulating your learning, you start to experience greater self-awareness. You make better decisions, and as a result, you start to learn faster. You get better results. So much so that you start to feel more confident. Not because you're a jack of all trades, but because you're a master of one. And perhaps, arguably, the most important one, learning. Do you know or care about a young person? Maybe your own daughter, son, nephew, niece, student. How are they developing as a self-regulated learner? Someone who understands their thinking, their learning process, and has access to a suite of strategies, they're remote. And how confident are you that they are developing these skills at school? Let's pretend for a moment that you're a fly on the wall of your young person's classroom. I used to be a science teacher, so we're going to make this a science classroom. You can imagine rows of tables facing a whiteboard and a teacher demonstration desk. You can imagine maybe around the periphery, some higher tables, those practice that they used to have and they still have in many classrooms. I can see people nodding their heads. There's an unusual smell in the room, typical of science classrooms. It's most likely the remnants of the previous class's chemical experiment, or perhaps some sort of biological dissection. And there's a buzz of student chatter. The teacher's just introducing a new concept. They're at the board, they're introducing it, they're drawing it up on the whiteboard, and they're explaining it. There's a few students asking questions. After a little bit more instruction, they're given a task, an independent activity, and the students off they go to do that independent activity. Now, these are young people we're talking about, so some of them get distracted. After a little while, the teacher realizes and wanders over to address the behavior. Now, your young person's sitting here in the middle. They're staring blankly at the task. They appear a little bit overwhelmed, perhaps somewhat paralyzed in the moment. They're not doing anything. They're not making any progress. It's that feeling of your heart sinks for that young person. In that brief example, did you see or hear any explicit teaching of self-regulated learning? It would be difficult to notice for an untrained eye, but in this particular lesson scenario, the teacher was spending more time focused on content, helping the students understand that scientific content. And this might be the case for most of our young people, or at least many. It seems that we, teachers, spend very little time in classrooms explicitly teaching self-regulated learning. In some cases, as little as 2 minutes of a 45-minute lesson. That's 4%. It's 4% of a lesson spent explicitly teaching self-regulated learning. I, for one, am concerned. I'm concerned for my daughter, and I'm concerned more broadly for our young people. Will she have to haphazardly discover this skill set post-school? Or worse still, will she have to navigate life without it? Many teachers tell me that they weren't trained in how to teach self-regulated learning. It's probably the case for many who did their teaching degrees 20 years or so ago. But actually, even for teachers today, self-regulated learning gets very little attention in undergraduate teaching degrees, sometimes as little as only sort of within one unit, perhaps even within like 1 or 2 weeks at most. So we've got teachers telling me that they don't have a deep knowledge in self-regulated learning and the strategies, the repertoire of strategies. And so they don't have the same the confidence that they would like to be able to teach it. Add in a system that seemingly prioritizes subject performance over fostering a strong identity as a learner, and perhaps that explains why we're in the state we currently are in. But through my work and research with teachers, what I've realised is that there is a group of educators ready to take action. This group of educators are starting to reframe the we can't to a we can. This group of educators are reflecting on their beliefs. They're starting to deepen their knowledge about self-regulated learning, and they're starting to experiment and explore strategies for teaching self-regulated learning in the classroom. You could say that this group already have their glasses on. They're learning about self-regulated learning, and they're moving from aspiration to commitment. So let's replay the classroom, but this time with one of these teachers. This time, before the teacher even starts introducing the content, there's a conversation about how humans process verbal information. There's a discussion of listening strategies, note-taking strategies. One student says, "Hey, miss, I prefer to take notes using the Cornell note-taking method." Another student says, "Actually, no, I prefer to engage in active and deep listening before I take any notes. So, miss, if I could have some time after, that would be great." A third student, an international student, says, "Hey, would it be okay if I press record on my laptop so that I can revisit it later at a slower pace?" Teacher explains the concept, the scientific concept. There's a few more questions, and then just before the independent activity, the teacher says, "Wait, pause. I want to teach you a self-monitoring strategy to help you regulate your attention before you go into this activity." Teacher uses the NEMO framework, a very simple framework for teaching strategies. She names it, she explains it, she models it, and she provides the students an opportunity for them to practice. And the independent activity is a perfect place for them to practice. Off they go. Now, they're young people, so again, young people get distracted. And in this moment, that same group, they get distracted. But this time, before the teacher realises, the students are able to catch themselves because they're practicing this self-monitoring strategy. And they refocus their attention on the task, leaving the teacher to have deeper conversations about science and learning with other students. Your young person who's sitting there in the middle, in that same moment of, "Oh, I don't know what I'm doing here," that moment's only ever so brief, because in that moment, your young person remembers a handful of strategies that they can draw on. And in this case, they just reread the task instructions, they tell themselves what they need to do, and they take a step forward. They start taking action, they make progress. Now, the long-term benefit for our young people of this type of classroom is that they master not a school system, but a learning system that they can apply well beyond school and with life, and navigate the challenges that come with life. Just imagine a generation of self-regulated learners, a group that are aware of themselves as learners, the thinking processes that underpin that, and can change and alter that so they can maximise their learning. Imagine a generation who, when faced with an unstable work and social landscape, refocus on learning and development. A generation who, when faced with climate change, might ask themselves, what can we learn from this? How might we learn to live more sustainably? A generation who, when faced with political unrest and war, are willing to learn to work together for a better future. My hope for our young people, my daughter, my hope for you, darling girl, is not that all the problems of this world dissipate. I would love that, but I don't think that's going to happen. My hope for you, darling, is that you have an experience in education that not only fosters your identity as a learner, but equips you with the skills to be able to self-regulate that learning. My hope for all of you here today is that you might also reflect on your own self-regulated learning capabilities. But more importantly, perhaps, Keep these glasses, make them your most favourite, your most prominent. Because we can learn to be better leaders. We can learn to be better teachers. We can even learn to be better parents. But it all starts with you and your identity as a learner.